Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the second class of your introductory biology course. So thank you for those of you who handed in the quizzes that I had handed out last week. That gives me a very good idea where we are in terms of your understanding about basic biological concepts or what you know about it. So that also allows me to, tailor the lectures accordingly. So what we will do today is cover two themes, and this slide here gives you the objectives and outcomes that I hope for this lecture. So I've divided that up into two themes. In the first theme, we learn to define biology and list its various branches. And in the second theme, we will list what properties actually define life. We look at some real examples. So are we ready?
Yes.
So the first theme, what is biology? What comes to your mind?
Life.
Life, exactly. You're definitely true. So it's all about life. And but when you're talking about a scientific definition, we need to have a little more meat around it and a little more context. So obviously, when you look at the word biology, it's derived from the Greek word bios, meaning life, and logia, which means study. So it's basically the study of life. And a good definition is it's the science of life and of living organisms, including their structure, their function, growth, origin, and distribution. So that pretty much covers the whole gambit of what we study in biology. Let's, for example, look at the flower here. Okay? When you look at that flower, you see a certain arrangement, you see a certain pattern that again comes under the gambit of biology. First of all, it's a living thing, and how is it arranged? What's the structure? What's the function? If you think about the function, there's going to be pollination, there's going to be growth. And let's look at this little child. When we first look at the child crying, we have a certain emotion. There's empathy for the child. But if you think about it biologically, the child is shedding tears, and that has to come from some biological process within the glands inside the eyes. So that's what biology would study. So is that a good example to kind of, illustrate the point?
Yes.
Okay. So the other thing then is, broadly speaking, biology traditionally has been divided into three domains. The first is botany, which obviously is the study of plants. And then you have zoology, which is the study of animals. And we have something called microbiology, which is the study of microbes. So these are the three traditionally accepted themes or areas of biology. But as we've evolved in our understanding, there's been a lot more complexity to it. Now, the way we look at biology is we can divide them up into what is known as basic biology and what can be termed as applied biology. So when you talk about basic biology, what we're referring to is studying the basic mechanisms which go on in biological cells or tissues, right? And then applied biology is taking it up a notch and saying, okay, whatever I learned from my basic biology, I'm now going to apply it to come up with, say, products. Drugs are a good example of that. We study basic mechanisms, we come up with a drug. So that's applying the biological concepts that you get from basics and apply it to human problems. Now, if you look at this little wheel here, you can see that they all tie in. You have diverse areas like biogeography, ecology, animal husbandry, poultry, horticulture. So they all tie in to this whole theme of biology. And one thing, again, is interesting is you have also something called paleontology. And can anyone tell me what this is?
Dinosaurs?
Dinosaurs, study of dinosaurs. Very good. So I'll get back to this a little later, as a theme for some discussion. So this is my first theme, pretty brief, but we needed to have this concept clear in our heads, what biology means, what its scope. So the take-home message for you is that the biology is the study of living organisms, including the structure, function, origin, and evolution, and traditionally divided into botany, zoology, and microbiology. And branches of biology can be as diverse and categorized as basic and applied. And as we saw, there are quite a few of them. So are we clear on this theme? Okay, so let's have some fun. So let's do a little concept checks. Can you give me two examples of biological samples in this room?
Air.
Anybody else?
Us.
Exactly. So there are 4 biological samples in this room right now, right? So because we are all life forms, we are all biological samples. Now, here's something that I want you to look at. We have 2 rocks. Look at the one on your right and your left. And which one, if I study, can I categorize it as studying biology?
The moss.
The moss, exactly. Can you tell me why?
Moss is a living organism.
Exactly. So it's basically moss growing on the rock, and what their interaction is, that definitely would fall under the gambit of biology. But the other one is probably a geology concept, right? So does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'd like to do next class is, I talked about paleontology, which is like Shari pointed out, is a study of dinosaurs. So this is an interesting concept because what you're studying is dead fossils, right? So now is this biology? So there is debate. So what I'd like you to do is divide the class up into two groups. I've posted the details of the groups on the blackboard so you can communicate with each other. Come up with, group one will say yes and come up with reasons why you think so. And group two, let's focus on saying no and why you think so. So that should give us some good discussion next class. Does that sound good? Okay. So let's move on to the next theme. Who is alive? Okay. So if I ask a philosopher, I'll get a very different answer. If I ask a physicist, I'll get an extremely different answer. So as a biologist, how do I look at life? Okay. So that's what we're going to talk about. So when you talk to a biologist or a biochemist or anyone doing biomedical research, they would list out 8 properties which would define life. So I've listed those out here. First is they must be cellular. The second is they must display order and organization. They must reproduce, must grow and develop, and they must process energy, must respond to environmental stimuli, and regulate internal environment, and adopt and evolve. So these are the 8 main concepts which make up life, or which would define life. Okay? So we'll go through those one by one. So what do we mean by an organism being cellular? It just means that we know that cells are the basic units of life, and organisms can be unicellular, meaning they have a single cell, or they could be multicellular, meaning they could have a large number of cells. Let's look at a bacteria, for example. It's a single cell, so it's a unicellular organism, but you also have amoeba, which is a little more complex, okay? So this is called as a prokaryote, and this is called as a eukaryote, basically meaning a prototype, something which is more primitive, and a eukaryote is something more evolved. So we still have single cells, but one could be a little more primitive, one could be a little more evolved, but they will all be unicellular, meaning single cell. The other organisms are multicellular. We are examples of multicellular organisms. We have trillions of cells in our bodies, right? So, for example, here you have a human bone cell. Right away you can see the large number of cells there. And similarly, you peel off an onion and you can see a lot of cells. So, unicellular or multicellular, the bottom line is all living things are made up of cells. The second is all living things display order and organization. And the reason I say that is if you look at that flower, we have that order and organization which performs a certain function. A dog, for example, is four-legged. The very basis for its being four-legged is the function it performs. It has to run, it has to walk on 4 legs, right? So that gives you the concept of organization and structure-function relationship in terms of how they're organized. The third is they must reproduce, and there are 2 types of reproduction, asexual and sexual. Asexual reproduction is one parent makes identical copies of itself. This occurs in lower prokaryotic organisms. And in sexual reproduction, you have 2 parents, and these are in the higher forms. There are exceptions. A mule is a good example. This is usually between species, and the exceptions are like mules. Can anyone else think of an example? There's something called a tigon. There's a tiger and a lion. So, so there are examples of that. So those are exceptions. That's not the rule. But that's an important point to keep in the back of your head. So the fourth is they must grow and develop. So basically, growth is growing in size. The cells divide and increase in size. A baby is born, it grows up, so it's basically growing. But there's something called development, basically getting specialized in your functions. Your brain developing in terms of its thinking capabilities, your nails growing, or your hair growing. That's development. Okay. So both of these are related concepts. So you have both growth and development, and the signals for these are in our DNA, which is in the nucleus, which is our genetic material. For example, here you have, an alligator coming out of an egg, It's just growing, and then it develops into what we know, which is in the waters there. So the fifth is everything should be able to process energy. All living forms, we all know, require energy, and they must be able to process it. So the first is plants. They process it by taking in sunlight, and they're called as autotrophs because they're able to directly utilize the energy from the sunlight. And you have an example, say, of a bear eating a fish. That's an animal taking in energy from a fish. What's going to do? It's going to eat up the fish, break up the proteins that it ingests, and then release the energy. So in any case, you have energy being processed. Okay, and you also have cases where you have bacteria which can use chemicals as a source of energy. Okay. The sixth is they must respond to environmental stimuli. A stimulus is the cause for a reaction, correct? Would you agree? And a response is the reaction to the cause, correct? You reacted to my clapping. So that's an example of you reacting to a stimulus, right? Some other interesting examples would be in cold if you shiver. You're basically shivering to protect your body heat, right? And the second is if you see a lion just walking, you just run off. That's because you're responding to a very scary stimuli. And in this example here, you have what is known as a Venus flytrap. When you have a damsel fly come and sit on it, it just snaps on it. So that's the kind of response which we observe in nature. So the seventh is they must regulate internal environment. So what we're talking about is we know about bears hibernating in winter. We know about elephants, just putting water on themselves. And we also know about athletes who sweat. So these are three examples of how we regulate our internal environment, which is called as maintaining homeostasis. So the three types of homeostasis are thermoregulation, meaning something to do with temperature. So you're regulating your body heat. The second is osmoregulation, which is maintaining your water. And the third is excretion, where you basically say, you take out your nitrogenous wastes. And the last is evolutionary adaptation. So basically, organisms have to adopt. So one good example is what is known as a katydid. So if you look at this figure here, you see this green insect. You cannot distinguish it from the flower. So it's basically an adaptation to save itself from the predators. Okay. So and this being favorable gets goes into the next generation and is it's called as an evolutionary adaptation. So the other examples would be drug-resistant bacteria and, like I said, camouflaging. So your take-home message is there are 8 characteristics which define life. The presence of some or all of these would qualify something as living, and I've listed these out here for your convenience. You can go and look at it. We've just discussed them. So let's do a concept check. Do you think tissues rather than cells are the basic blocks of life? True or false? We talked about cells, right? Tissues are one level up. So would you think cells
False.
or tissues?
False.
Cells, right?
False.
So give an example on your daily life of growth and development. Just think about anything that you can.
Healing wounds.
Right? That's developing or growing up your cells. Excellent. And here we have 3 examples here. A sunbathing lemur. Would it be thermoregulation, osmoregulation, or energy processing?
Thermal.
Thermal. Excellent. And how about a woman eating an apple? Energy. Excellent. And a water drinking athlete?
Osmo.
Awesome, excellent. So you got the concept, that's great. So here's some further reading and activities. Notes have been posted on the Blackboard and additional websites and YouTube links which will give you some more information on this. And I'd like you to complete the quiz online on Mastering Biology to assess your level of retention of today's lecture. And due date is 5th at 12 p.m. Login information is on the Blackboard. And again, prepare for your discussion next week. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me for clarifications at the posted hours. All right, that's it.